Last time, I told you this video would make you question why you wake up every morning and trade your time for money. So let's start with the alarm. It goes off. You didn't want it to. You get up anyway. You commute to a place you wouldn't go if you weren't paid to. You give it 8 hours, usually more. Then you come home, sleep, and do it all over again. 5 days a week. For about 50 years of your life. You've been told this is just how things are, that humans have always worked to survive. But for more than 90% of human history, nobody lived like this. There were no alarms, no bosses, no 40-hour work weeks, no weekends, because there was nothing to take a weekend from. And you've probably heard the famous claim that ancient hunter-gatherers only worked about 15 hours a week, that they had more free time than we do, that somehow, with all our technology, we ended up working more than people who lived in the Stone Age. It's a great story. You'll find it in books, TED Talks, and 1,000 YouTube videos. There's just one problem. It's not quite true. That 15-hour number? It's real. But it doesn't mean what people think it means. It comes from one anthropologist. His name was Richard Lee. In the 1960s, he traveled to the Kalahari Desert and lived with a group of hunter-gatherers called the Kung. He watched them, he counted, and he found something incredible. The adults spent only about 15 hours a week finding food. 15 hours. That's it. But here's the part that almost never gets repeated. Lee was measuring one thing: the time spent getting food, hunting it, gathering it. He wasn't counting the rest: the cooking, the cracking of nuts, the hauling of water, the making and fixing of tools. All the work that turned raw food into an actual meal. And when you add that back in, the real number wasn't 15 hours. It was closer to 40. Lee measured that too, about 44 hours a week for the men, 40 for the women. 40 hours. Does that sound familiar? So the myth falls apart. They worked about as much as we do. Except, that's not the end of the story. Because how much they worked was never really the point. So if they worked about as much as we do, where's the difference? Here it is. Their work ended. Think about what a hunter-gatherer was actually doing. You hunt, you gather, you bring back enough food for a few days, and then you stop. There was no reason to keep going. You couldn't store a surplus. If you killed more than you could eat, it rotted. If you gathered more than you could carry, you left it behind. The whole group moved too often to hoard anything. So once you had enough, you were done. You went back to camp. You rested. You talked. You made things, played games, slept in the afternoon. Anthropologists who lived with these groups describe something strange to modern eyes. People who, half the time, simply didn't know what to do with themselves. Their work had a finish line. A clear, daily, physical point where the body said, "That's enough." Now look at your own work. When is it done? You hit your target, they raise it. You finish the project, there's another one. You make more money, and somehow you need more money. The inbox refills overnight. The to-do list never empties. There is no point in your week where the world says that's enough, go rest. And that's the real difference. Not the hours. The hours are about the same. It's that their work had an end, and ours doesn't. One anthropologist, Marshall Salins, put it perfectly. He said there are two ways to be rich. You can produce a lot, or you can want very little. Hunter-gatherers took the second road. They wanted little, so they were satisfied easily, and the rest was free time. We took the first road. We can produce almost anything. But our wants? Our wants have no ceiling. And that raises a question we can't avoid. If their life had a finish line, how did we lose ours? To understand how we lost the finish line, we have to go back about 12,000 years, to the moment everything changed. Farming. We're taught this was humanity's great leap forward. We settled down, we grew our own food, we built villages, then cities, then everything you see around you. And that part is true. But here's what they don't tell you. For the people who actually lived through it, farming was a disaster. We know this because we can read their bones. When scientists dig up skeletons from right after the switch to farming, they find something grim. These people were shorter than the hunter-gatherers before them. A 2022 study found early farmers lost almost 4 centimeters of height. Their teeth were full of cavities. Their bones show malnutrition, signs of disease, overwork, and bodies pushed too hard. The hunter-gatherers ate dozens of different wild foods. The farmers bet everything on 1 or 2 crops. So when a harvest failed, they starved. And because they now lived crowded together, packed in beside their animals and their waste, disease spread like wildfire. By almost every measure, the first farmers were worse off than the hunters who came before them. One scientist called farming the worst mistake in the history of the human race. So here's the obvious question. If farming made people shorter, sicker, and hungrier, why didn't they just stop? And this is the part that matters. Because they couldn't. Nobody sat down and chose this. There was no meeting, no decision. Farming spread slowly, over hundreds of years, one generation at a time. And farming did one thing incredibly well. It produced more people. More food per acre meant more babies. More babies meant more mouths. More mouths meant you needed more farming. And once your whole population depended on those crops, there was no going back. You couldn't feed a village by hunting anymore. They were trapped. Not by a choice, by a ratchet that only turned one way. And that ratchet is still turning today. For thousands of years after farming, work was hard. But it still followed something natural. You worked with the sun. You planted in spring. You harvested in fall. When it got dark, you stopped. The task told you when you were done, not a number. Historians call this task orientation. Your day was shaped by what needed doing. Milk the cow, mend the fence, bring in the wheat. When the task was finished, the work was finished. Work and life weren't separate. They blurred together. You'd work, then talk, then work, then rest, all mixed into one day. Nobody was counting the minutes. And then came the machine. When factories arrived, something broke. A machine doesn't care about sunrise. It doesn't care about seasons. It runs at a constant speed, all day, every day, and it needs people to match it. So for the first time in human history, work wasn't measured by the task. It was measured by time. The clock walked in the door, and it changed everything. Factory owners installed clocks on the walls. They rang bells to start the day. They locked the gates when your shift began. If you were late, you were fined. If you were slow, you were punished. A historian named E.P. Thompson described this moment. He said that under the old way, time was passed. Under the new way, time was spent. Your hours stopped belonging to you. They now belong to whoever was paying you. Time became money. But not your money, the employer's money. Think about what that did. Before, you sold what you made. A basket, a sack of grain, a horseshoe. Now you sold something else entirely. You sold your time. Raw hours of your life, handed over by the clock. And once your time had a price, it could always be bought. There was no natural stopping point anymore. No sundown that ended the day. Just a number on a wall, deciding when you were allowed to leave. The finish line wasn't just gone. It had been replaced by a clock. For a while, it looked like we might win the time back. Once work was measured in hours, people started fighting over how many. And the early factory days were brutal. 12, 14, 16 hours, 6 days a week. Children working through the night. So workers organized. They went on strike. They marched, they were beaten, and some of them died. All for one simple idea. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for whatever you want. It took almost 100 years. Then in 1926, Henry Ford did something radical. He cut his factories to 5 days a week. 40 hours, same pay. And here's the part people forget. Ford wasn't being generous. He'd figured out that workers with a day off and money in their pockets would do something useful for him. They'd go shopping. They'd buy his cars. In 1938, it became law. The 40-hour week was born, and for a moment, the future looked bright. Because everyone could see where this was going. Machines were getting better. We were producing more with less effort, every single year. One of the most famous economists who ever lived did the math. His name was John Maynard Keynes. In 1930, he made a prediction about us, about the people living 100 years later. He said that by 2030, Machines would be so productive that we'd barely need to work at all. His guess? A 15-hour week. 3 hours a day. The rest would be ours. For art, for leisure, for life. Well, it's almost 2030. And he was right about one thing. We did get richer. Far richer. The average person produces 4 to 8 times more than they did back then. But the 15-hour week? It never came. We took all of that incredible productivity, and we didn't turn it into free time. We turned it into more stuff. Bigger houses, more gadgets, more things to want. Keynes got the machines right. What he got wrong was us. So let's go back to the beginning. To you and your alarm. You were told that humans have always worked like this. That it's just survival, that it's natural. But now you know the truth. For most of our history, work had a finish line. You did what the day required, and then you stopped. Because there was nothing left to chase. Your wants were small, and the world could fill them. Then farming trapped us in a ratchet that only turned one way. The clock turned our time into something we sold. And the machines that were supposed to set us free just raised the target instead. Here's the thing nobody tells you. We did solve the problem Keynes wrote about. We built a world where, by his math, 15 hours of work could be enough. The finish line is right there. We could cross it. We just don't. Because every time we get close, we move it. A bigger house. A nicer car. One more thing we didn't know we wanted until someone sold it to us. The wanting is the engine. And the engine never turns off. That's the real reason you trade your time for money. Not because you have to survive. Survival got cheap a long time ago. You do it because we built a world with no enough in it. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing you can do now is to decide for yourself where your finish line is. Because no one else is going to draw it for you. So here's a question to sit with. If you already have enough to live, what exactly are you still working for? Most of us are working toward one quiet dream. Enough money that we'd never have to work again. Wealth. Fast. And some people seem to get there overnight. One single day where they go from ordinary to rich. So in the next video, we're asking the obvious question. Is it real? Can wealth actually be built in 24 hours? And if it can, how does that actually work? It's stranger than the story you've been sold. If you want to see what's really behind overnight wealth, like, share, and subscribe to Curious Black. And I'll see you there.